So welcome, everyone. I'm really excited to be with you in this space tonight and introduce you, if you haven't met us yet, to Early Care Educators of San Francisco, and welcome also those who work with us and have been part of the community for some time. Early Care Educators of San Francisco is a grassroots organization bringing San Francisco early care educators together across diverse early care education, community-based and public sites, including centers and family childcare. We are peers supporting each other, making sure we all know what's happening and ensuring that new program implemented to help us and the important work that you do really does make a difference. And I just want to take a minute here to recognize some of the people that have been supporting our work most recently. Anna is a co-staff person with me. Thank you for supporting that interpretation on the back end. Thank you to our 3 interpreters, Sabrina, Roxanne, and Gia. And thanks, Gia, for doing all the support interpretation for the focus group that we just held in Cantonese. And then I want to welcome and recognize Joanne Lee Yuen for holding the facilitation of the first Cantonese group. Hey, Joanne. And Pat Sullivan, I saw here as a board member of Early Care Educators of San Francisco and our co-chair. Good to have you here tonight as well, Pat. And if I missed a board member who was able to make it without letting me know, please shout out hello to everyone in chat. And I don't see Lashante here, but if you're here, a big thank you for holding the first Black teacher early care educator of San Francisco focus group that will be starting very soon. So with that, I just want to say that the newly released Prop C funds that I hope all of you are aware of are rolling out in new programs this coming July. And some of that funding will be going to raising compensation and improving working conditions at your sites. And that will be part of the Early Learning San Francisco funding. So all programs that participate in that funding will be receiving these funds. Tonight's events will take a deep look at belonging. And that is something that should be at the core of improving workforce conditions. One of those, shall I call it a soft skill or a soft area of that I think we don't think about often enough. And so I'm excited to be thinking together in this space with all of you about what it means to feel belonging.
的qué se trata la apertura
in many ways before. I'm delighted to introduce her tonight as a new Early Care Educators of San Francisco board member.
分享過好多次。咁 early educators
and super happy that she'll be bringing this important presentation to each of you as part of the ECESF community. That is the community of early care educators of San Francisco, which each of you are. So we can think and act together after tonight about the change we need to build more belonging in our working community. With that, I'd like to introduce and welcome Michelle Morano.
Thank you, Sarah. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to share my screen. And just to let you know, I'm going to try to let you have a couple minutes heads up when we're going to have a break. We'll have a couple of breaks throughout our evening, but I encourage you to get something to drink or a snack to have at your side. Take care of yourselves. I know as well as me, we just all finished a long day of work. So I really appreciate you taking extra time out of your day to devote your mind and body to learning more about belonging. And I would love to share my screen if possible. It says host has disabled participant screen sharing. Anna, if you could hook me up maybe. Oh, great, I'm a co-host, so should be able to do it. Perfect. All right. So if someone could just give me a shout out that you can see the screen, I'll know I'm good to go.
You can see the screen.
Great. All right. So as Sarah said, my name is Michelle Morano. I'm a preschool teacher here in San Francisco. I've been a full-time educator for about 10 years now, although my start in early childhood started in 2000, so about 20 years now, a little over that. I've been in and out of the field. So I started as a teaching aide, worked my way through college, and earned my degree in a completely different field. I studied broadcasting, San Francisco State University. Go Gators. I've also dabbled in some other fields of work before I fully returned and committed to a career in ECE. And working in those other sectors gave me a really deep look at how different types of working environments function, how employees and workers in those environments are treated and communicated with, listened to, cared for. So I'm going to be talking today, and if you've been to one of these talks with me before, I guarantee you it will be different. You'll walk away with some new information that I've never talked about before. So we're going to basically dive into how educators and caregivers can go about learning how to advocate, not just for our own needs, but for an increased sense of belonging in general in our workforce. You know, we live in a world that asks so much of us, all of us, not just ECE folks, but in a lot of places, we're given back just enough to get by, and sometimes even less. And I'll share a little bit about the ways we can all use our ideas, our experiences, our identities to just increase that sense of belonging. And the word belonging, we'll dig into that as well. I know it's a kind of a buzzword these days, but I'll tell you a little bit about what I think it means. We'll have time to talk about what you believe it means. And just to build that sense of belonging for ourselves, our colleagues, our organizations, and our communities at large. So I just want to take a minute to appreciate Sarah and Anna for encouraging me to bring this conversation of belonging to you all. I hope this is the beginning of many conversations that we can reflect on the similarities and differences in our things like our values, our voices, our visions, and especially during this crucial time in our field of work. As Sarah said, we have some important things coming up in our field. And so we're going to get a little bit specific about those, but we're also going to talk in general terms about what belonging means for each of us. So whether you're an independent childcare facilitator or in a collaboration with others at centers, whether your roles include administrative tasks or are more focused in the classroom or in home care, I hope that by sharing some time tonight and having these conversations, we can start to get more comfortable about being curious and being curious about ourselves and each other, so that when the time comes for policymakers who are often asked to consider what is needed in ECE, we will be ready to equip them with a more accurate picture of what we actually need, who we actually are, what we really experience in the day-to-day, and what initiatives and policies we find to be most meaningful. So I don't have to tell you, you can already tell from the fact that you're all here tonight, this is really important work. I've always been passionate about self-awareness and noticing organizational inequities and the exclusions that are at play in ECE. And so I was given a great opportunity a little over a year ago, to think about these issues firsthand and learn about how to think about them from a healthcare expert and professional belonging strategist named Dr. Montrese McNeil Ransom. Highly encourage you to look her up after this. She really inspired me to share this thinking and action-oriented work with teachers, caregivers, anyone who supports the people that support children and families. Tonight will be part storytelling, part conversation, maybe part classroom, depending on what we're able to get to in the short time.
一样的对话，就在我们这个短短的时间里面能够做到什麼，我們都可以盡量。今天我
個電子郵件進行個傾偈啦。如果今日有啲咩讓你不愉快嘅話咧，你可以話俾我知。我今日嘅目標係想喺呢度探索歸屬感同埋同時係。Sarah and Anna will let me know to slow it down. So please also feel free to let me know or call me in if anything presented today lands on. 咁你可以打電話俾我，或者話俾我知，如果有啲咩唔高興嘅話。
Mi objetivo aquí es proporcionar pertenencia mientras exploramos.
Whether it's critical or positive, definitely welcomed. I'm also constantly learning and growing in this complex work. Might have to have patience with some of my tech skills. But I just want to start by offering you a quote that encompasses so much of how I approach not only belonging, but just my everyday work as a teacher leader, as a coach, as a consultant. And that is, the mightiest works start with the smallest steps. A lot of times when we join a community, we're prompted to think about what we're going to bring to the group. So I just want us to take a moment to consider all that that includes: your experiences, your knowledge, your wisdom, everything that we share with each other on a daily basis, the things we kind of take for granted, so to speak. For some of us, belonging starts by recognizing we're all starting from different places. Some of us may have already begun the journey of self-reflection. Others might have a really strong foundation of self-awareness, but haven't identified some of the values that we want to put into practice, either with a new project or a new job, and having new leadership, new professional setting, whether it's outside of the classroom, going back to the classroom. These are just all the types of things that we're constantly swimming around in. And so whatever your place or starting point is right now, I just invite you to think not about the destination, but more of the stepping stones along your journey. So the small step you're taking today by being present here tonight is just to learn more about belonging. And that's the beginning place for where we can all start again from, and hopefully we'll return to many times over. Dr. Matrice McNeil Ransom, I'll say her name again so I can hopefully drill it into your brains and you can look her up afterwards. She inspired this presentation, and she once said to me and a group of educators very much like us all, belonging is something you create for yourself. So in the same spirit, I offer you the mightiest works start with the smallest steps. Like the skipper who simply hoisted the sails for the yacht to circumnavigate the globe, or like the farmer who simply planted a seed that grew into an abundant harvest. I wish I knew who to attribute that lovely quote to, but I've scoured Google, couldn't figure it out. But the message is simple: to get anywhere, we must start somewhere. Whether the task is large or small, individual or collective, we must first start. So no matter where you're headed, no matter who joins you or doesn't join you in creating this deeper sense of unity, just deeper sense of inclusion in the work that we're set out to do, I hope if you take another thing away, it's that belonging starts with each of us. It begins with you knowing and understanding, claiming your individual identity. We're going to do a breakout based on that. But again, belonging is something we create for ourselves. We can, our experiences, our voices, our perspectives, our contributions do matter. I had to hear that several times, and I'll explain why. I'm going to do a little storytelling, but I really had to hear that several times for it to sink in. So it's okay to have your camera off. We're not going to ask you to share out into the large group. We will ask you to share in breakouts, but we really do that because it's something that needs to happen in conversation. So I encourage you to be brave, to share your truth, and just share kind of where you are in the journey as we go along. The next few slides are just a peek at some of my stepping stones along the way to actually, like I said, letting that sink in and knowing more about myself and what I can bring to the table. And as you listen to my story, I hope you can reflect on your own truth, the story of you, and consider how our stories sometimes intertwine, sometimes they run parallel. And even though we may not know or understand everything about each other yet, we can definitely start small. So to start small, I'm going to start with the story of my smaller self. My smaller self was born into a blue-collar working class, Italian-American and Mexican-American family. I was raised in the suburbs in the 1980s with a younger brother. And it took me many years to be able to share this without feeling emotional about it, but I have a family history of mental illness. So I was the child of an undiagnosed, untreated, mentally ill parent. So on a daily basis, one of my parents would become easily triggered, react very explosively, irrationally, and unfortunately, my other parent was a bit avoidant, exhausted, and had very few options for improving the situation. Not many people knew about it. We didn't talk about it. In those days, it was still really taboo to talk about mental illness. Words like emotional dysregulation, depression, anxiety, things we're hearing a lot more nowadays, they weren't as commonly used as they are today. So because of these dynamics, I suffered extreme levels of chronic emotional, psychological, and physical trauma, and various forms, unfortunately, of emotional and physical abandonment and abuse. So because of these dynamics, a lot of the caregiving was aimed toward my mentally ill parent, leaving my sibling and I with very few opportunities to feel seen or heard. Little Michelle grew up believing the world was pretty unsafe, unpredictable, uncontrollable, and a highly stressful place to be. In childhood and young adulthood, I found myself getting more comfortable in communities and groups where I could be known and seen and responded to as one of many, but still, my individual voice just really shied away from the spotlight. I wanted to just belong for belonging's sake. Given the chance, I only used my voice to go along with the voices of those around me. And most of the time it worked out because I was lucky enough to be part of groups that, were aligned with the things that I believed I valued and enjoyed the things that I enjoyed. But I still really didn't know much about myself as an individual. And maybe this resonates with some of you. Maybe this is common in youth. I didn't know at the time. It just felt like it was, it was my truth. But when it came time to enter the workforce, I had to work really hard to find my own voice. Now I can speak and use my own voice in a different way, but back then, the only time I used my voice I was really involved in, things like theater and singing, and I like to entertain. But when I was asked for an opinion of what I believed, what I needed, what was I for or against, I had no idea. I had no experience considering any of those things. I was really only expected to obey or set aside my personal preferences for what I was told to do, or left with, I was left with what my caregivers could provide after my parents' needs were met. And much of my young adulthood was really a lesson in finding my own values too, through a lot of trial and error, many errors. So I would have I wanted to do that so I'd have a place to speak from when speaking up was necessary. And rather than stand by and assume that my needs or ideas didn't take priority, like when I was a child, I started to do that work. I didn't know I was doing the work of cultivating belonging, but that's in fact what I was doing. So it wasn't until much later that I got some distance from the dynamics I was raised in, really got serious about addressing my own mental health, my complex PTSD, other factors that contributed to a sense of, not belonging. That's when I actively sought ways to really unravel some of my responses to the past and present stress that I experienced. So I was ready to cultivate belonging that was separate from my upbringing. And so to create my own sense of place and value in the world, this is what I did. So when I settled into my career as a teacher, I learned more and more about how my perspective and voice could actually influence things. For example, in the classroom, it really energized and inspired and comforted the children in my care. It humored and honored and motivated my colleagues, but I still found myself working in an organization that, for all its great services for families and children, did a really poor job of listening to and meeting the needs of its teachers, unfortunately. I often felt silenced when trying to explain what me and my fellow teachers needed in order to be successful at our jobs. I felt belittled for asking questions or giving ideas at meetings. And I felt ignored when time and time again I would bring up things that just never seemed to get resolved. So after almost 7 years in the same organization, I quit working for that organization. Now, I don't recommend quitting your job if these things are present for you. I don't encourage staying where you're not treated well or listened to, but just do an experiment. See what happens when you have an idea, a question, a complaint about your working conditions. Do you feel heard? Do you feel like it matters to anyone but you? So if the answers to these questions are no, just start asking yourself why. And think about, again, that small step you can take to find someone it does matter to. I'm really happy to say that when I found really happy to say I found a place in an organization that does align with my voice and my values and my visions. And I was offered a job at that place. So it's a school, like I said, that feels right to me. They appreciate and value me. I didn't know I could ask for that or seek that out before. So it was a really big deal for me. It's a place where I felt like I truly belong. once you get a taste of it, it opens up the world. So this is, again, why I share this part of my journey. So as Sarah mentioned, I'm a new board member at ECSF. I couldn't be more proud and happy to have become a board member. So, you know, I'm all about networking, joining groups, and I met a lot of wonderful people through not only ECSF, but other groups of like-minded educators here in San Francisco. Few of us felt so strongly that our voices and perspectives and stories mattered that we started a podcast. So I found belonging using my voice, and now others are listening to it. It's pretty cool. I also found my voice in professional development workshops, presentations like this, sharing my story, and just hopefully to inspire people like you to break through the barriers of one-sided working relationships. That's kind of where it, you know, kind of all landed for me, is I was not willing to tolerate that anymore. And I didn't know that was my standard until it was. So, you know, I appreciate you letting me share kind of that journey, and hoping that we can find ways for all of you to feel that deeper sense of belonging without having to quit your job or feel a lot of the frustration that it took me. And I would love to share another story with you. I'm going to try my best to pronounce the name of this person. Her name is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, and she's going to tell us a little bit about the danger of a single story. And I'm going to cue it up if possible.
I come from a conventional middle-class Nigerian family. My father was a professor. My mother was an administrator. And so we had, as was the norm, live-in domestic help who would often come from nearby rural villages. So the year I turned 8, we got a new houseboy. His name was Fide. The only thing my mother told us about him was that his family was very poor. My mother sent yams and rice and old clothes to his family. And when I didn't finish my dinner, my mother would say, "Finish your food. Don't you know people like Fide's family have nothing?" So I felt enormous pity for Fide's family. Then one Saturday, we went to his village to visit. And his mother showed
Alguna vez fui a su pueblo
of dyed raffia that his brother had made. I was startled. It had not occurred to me that anybody in his family could actually make something. All I had heard about them was how poor they were, so that it had become impossible for me to see them as anything else but poor. Their poverty was my single story of them. Years later, I thought about this when I left Nigeria to go to university in the United States. I was 19. My American roommate was shocked by me. She asked where I had learned to speak English so well and was confused when I said that Nigeria happened to have English as its official language. She asked if she could listen to what she called my tribal music and was consequently very disappointed when I produced my tape of Mariah Carey. She assumed that I did not know how to use a stove. What struck me was this: she had felt sorry for me even before she saw me. Her default position toward me as an African was a kind of patronizing, well-meaning pity. My roommate had a single story of Africa, a single story of catastrophe. In this single story, there was no possibility of Africans being similar to her in any way, no possibility of feelings more complex than pity, no possibility of a connection as human equals. I must say that before I went to the US, I didn't consciously identify as African. But in the US, whenever Africa came up, people turned to me, never mind that I knew nothing about places like Namibia. But I did come to embrace this new identity, and in many ways, I think of myself now as African, although I still get quite irritable when Africa is referred to as a country, the most recent example being my otherwise wonderful flight from Lagos 2 days ago, in which there was an announcement on the Virgin flight about their charity walk in India, Africa, and other countries. So after I had spent some years in the US as an African, I began to understand my roommate's response to me. If I had not grown up in Nigeria, and if all I knew about Africa were from popular images, I too would think that Africa was a place of beautiful landscapes, beautiful animals, and incomprehensible people fighting senseless wars, dying of poverty and AIDS, unable to speak for themselves, and waiting to be saved by a kind white foreigner.
So I don't know about you, but I'm sure we can all think of a time when a single story was said about us or assumed about us, or even when we ourselves perpetuated a single story about us, even in our own minds. So all of that ties into belonging. And the next thing we're going to do is kind of reflect on that. So we're going to kind of start to identify what our identity is in our own words. So you can do this in many ways. We are going to either just think about it. We're going to think about it as a large group, but then we will talk more about this in the breakouts. So as in my story, when my childhood greatly affected how little I felt I mattered, in this story, you can see how the roommate's single story of her definitely impacted how she felt about herself, but also just demonstrated how little time that person took to ask about her identity rather than to share her assumptions. So I want you to take a look at this wheel. This is known as the Paseo protocol. I hope I'm saying that right. And it's just an opportunity for you to think about yourself. And the circles on the outside of you are, you can fill them with descriptors. For example, some of my descriptors would be teacher, advocate, working class, spiritual, animal lover, trauma survivor. So those are just the things I've chosen kind of off the top of my head. But for each of us, this wheel is going to look a lot different. So go ahead and just take a moment, write down a couple things that come to mind when you think about your identity. And then we're going to look at another wheel of identity characteristics and reflect on some of the things that you identify with that have shaped your values, your perspective, your whole story. And then think about how these factors have added or taken away from your sense of belonging at any given time of your life. So before I show you that wheel of descriptors, I just want to keep it super open so you can think of what pops out in your mind. Keep in mind these factors can and probably will change as your identities and your identity and experiences change. Some things may have stayed the same about you your entire life, and that's okay. It's not about having the right words in these circles. It's not about having the right answer or saying the right thing or competing for the best identity around. It's more about what makes you say the things you say, what makes you do the things you do, what values guide how you think about yourself. What you say is important, but more importantly is why you're saying it. So your values and your voice will be the key ingredients in how much belonging you've cultivated, but also we have to start before we can really know deeply about ourselves, start with how we think about ourselves, the language that we use. So Anna, I'm going to ask you to start queuing up the breakouts. And I'm going to go ahead and add, let me show you the next thing I was going to tell you about. Oh, looks like I don't have it here. Okay, well, I will drop a link to the identity wheel that I was just referring to, and you can use it in your breakouts. And just some things to think about in the breakouts. Where are the places or what kinds of people have you felt like you belonged with? Where have you felt you didn't belong? What does belonging look or feel like for you? Okay, I'm going to copy and paste these into the chat, and I'm going to stop. There's the identity wheel. Okay, there you go. Go ahead and let you look at that for a minute just to give you some ideas of how to think about your different characteristics or what identity you feel most connected to. And Anna, let me know when you're ready for breakouts and I'll stop sharing my screen. Just Oh, can we actually wait on the recording, Anna? Thanks. So as I said before, belonging has become the buzzword, but it's so much more. I know organizations have been talking about things like diversity, equity, inclusion, this DEI framework that everybody is just kind of stamping onto their organization. But it's, to be honest, usually done so on a very surface level. I'm just going to be straight out critical of it. Not every organization does it well, unfortunately. There are groups and organizations that are trying really hard to show the complexity of these things. I'm just going to share with you some definitions that I grabbed from the Merriam-Webster dictionary, and then we'll talk more about kind of how we get to define those for ourselves in our workplaces. So equity is defined as an environment that ensures fair treatment and unbiased access to opportunities for all members of the community, recognizing and redistributing power to encourage each individual to achieve their unique potential. I'm going kind of slow because there's translation happening. So if I do need to slow down, please chat me or just interrupt me. Diversity definition: a workplace representative of multiple backgrounds, identities, skills, and abilities in the members of the community. Inclusion: a culture where all members of the community are actively welcomed, celebrated, supported, and valued because of their differences. So if we say we're about equity, we should be giving each other power and agency to do things that are meaningful, not just create or fill silent seats at a table. If we say we're about diversity, we have to practice doing things differently than we're used to, not just adding people from diverse backgrounds to our classrooms or offices or home childcare centers. If we say we're about inclusion, we better be including things that make us a little uncomfortable, not just including one or two things that are kind of different but fit without too much disruption. I'm sure you've all heard growth happens at the edges of our comfort zone. We don't want to be so uncomfortable that we can't focus and find a way forward, but we should be challenging ourselves at least enough to see noticeable differences from one point in time to another. I'll give you 3 examples: civil rights bus boycott, women's suffrage, child labor laws. With increased belonging comes a few things. This is what I believe. This is strictly my opinion, so feel free to disagree with me in the chat. With increased belonging, I believe becomes a world where children, families, and people are celebrated, supported, and included. Inclusion. Networks of people supporting each other toward more awareness and alignment with who they are, how they do things, and what they care about. Diversity. And communities where help, healing, and hope are accessible to everyone in the community. Equity. I need to get that on a bumper sticker somewhere. There's a lot of words though, so. And also with belonging, people are honored as whole human beings who are valued just for being in the world and are valuable to the world for more than just their time or labor. I'm going to say that again because that is probably the most important thing that I believe as a core value of mine. With belonging, people are honored as whole human beings who are valued just for being in this world and are valuable to the world for more than just their time or labor. So, another question. I'm all about reflection. I hope you've noticed. How do we get there? Just take a moment for yourself. We will go into a quick breakout for this one, not too quick because I do want us to have an actual conversation about it and not just do like one-off sharing. same as last time, everybody, please try and be heard. At least say one thing that's true for you. But how do you predict, or how do you think we can get there? And I'm gonna actually this time put my definitions, the Webster definitions, and then my definitions of equity, diversity, inclusion in the chat before you go to breakouts, so that you can have those to reference. And I'll give translators time to hopefully translate. Oh, it's not letting me. It's because it's a lot of words. Okay, try this again. So I'm giving you a really big kind of math problem. How are we going to get to belonging, knowing that organizations don't always give these things the time, the consideration, the resources that can get us there? Why we're here today, kind of all thinking together about, that big question, how are we going to get there? How are we going to get closer, I should say? All right. For this one, let's start with whoever has the shortest hair. If you would be the brave soul to go first and just offer a thought to get the ball rolling. And I'll give Anna time again to create the breakouts. And for this breakout, we'll do, let's see, we did about 10 minutes last time. Let's do about 7 minutes. I wish it was longer. We're gonna do smaller groups this time, so hopefully everybody will get a couple minutes to share. If you were in one of the groups, and you might, if you're in one of the, I believe, the English speaking groups, you might be split into two, so there will be 3 and 3 rather than 5 or 6. All right. Oh, and thank you, Anna. There's a doc I wanted to alert you to. I created just a Google Doc for people to, if they feel more comfortable typing their thoughts into a shared doc that we can all keep referring to even after this workshop, keep adding our thoughts to. Please feel free to use that. All right, let me get back into my slides. And I apologize ahead of time. This next slide has a bad word on it. I apologize if this offends you, but sorry, not sorry, because this is exactly how I feel. So I'm gonna make space for it. I hope you all can too. One of the ways I decided how to get to belonging for myself was to figure out what I actually needed and wanted in my everyday work and in my long-term career dynamics. So I asked myself, what kind of people do I like working with? Who do I work well with? Sometimes the two aren't always the same. Which of my job skills actually align with my personal values? What do I bring to the table that not only helps me feel like I'm choosing belonging and alignment and meaningfulness as often as possible, but what am I bringing to the table that makes me walk that walk, right? These are things I reflect on repeatedly, not just once a year, not just a couple times a year, but as often as I can. And I really, again, just am asking myself, am I meeting my own standards for how I thrive? Sometimes, as we saw with this pandemic, we gotta just roll with what's going on. We don't always have a lot of choice available. So being flexible and resilient are great skills to have. But we also owe it to ourselves to know what is or isn't contributing to our own success. And success is another word we define for ourselves. The purpose of this presentation, by success, I mean what keeps me, what keeps you, what keeps us as a workforce feeling like we belong and are living in alignment or are working in alignment with our values. So, the things I enjoy in my work, I narrowed it down. It's going to look different for you. This is just my kind of example to you all. Creativity, collaboration, connection, and I found those things in my teams, in my project groups, in the organization that I work with. So before I talk about what's on this slide, I just want to give shout out to, let's see, I gotta look at the participant list. I know a lot of you, actually, there's a lot of you. I can't name you all, but I know a lot of you have either participated in, facilitated, or will be participating in the teacher focus groups that ECSF has began, I believe, a year ago this spring, right? Yeah, it's been a year now. So last spring, I was in the first cohort. My colleagues and I participated in the first ever. And in the fall, I facilitated my own. And in both situations, I learned so much about how I was similar to and different from others in the ECE world. It was a super big eye-opening experience. I highly recommend, if you haven't signed up for one yet, please do. Or stay tuned, I should say, for upcoming ones. And so as you hear or read each statement, I won't read them all because we are, coming up on shortening our time. But as you look at some of these statements, which we will again send out after tonight, just decide for yourself or think about to what extent you can relate to what we found to be true for teachers who took part in the focus groups. So for example, on this slide, we learned that peer-to-peer support is really important to teachers. We love learning, right? We're in this field because part of us really enjoys the act of learning, whether it's seeing others do it or doing it ourselves, coaching, shadowing, all of those things involve learning. We also asked what teachers would like administrators to know. So consider how much of your ideas, your needs, your identity are included in the work you do. We found that a lot of teachers really don't think their ideas matter all that much. At the end of the day, someone else is going to be making the decisions, right? Or at the end of the day, oh yeah, thanks so much for that idea, but we're going to do the complete opposite, right? So it's such a tricky balance to strike between really feeling heard and really feeling like your ideas belong. So do you experience these dynamics in your ECE setting? Sometimes different generations of teachers come into play, and there's a lot of back and forth between the values because, let's face it, society's values change over time, and we all operate in cohorts based on different things like we showed in our identity wheels. And so sometimes our age has an impact on that. Sometimes the time we grew up in has a real impact on what we believe is important. And so we just want administrators to be able to keep those things in mind and offer real dialogue about some of these things as we think about them. And then lastly, we asked teachers and teachers shared what they would like policymakers to know. This is probably the most important slide. I hope all of you take a moment to read it in full when we send out the slides. Just think about it right now. What would you want a policymaker to know if you were in an elevator with one, or the subject came up over cocktail hour or a meet and greet with your local policymakers? What would pop in your head that, they've really got to know about this? I don't think they know this yet about teachers. I don't think they only have that single story. What would you add to that conversation? And then have you actually devoted any time to think about how these changes occur on a bigger scale? For myself, before I joined ECSF, never really crossed my mind. I knew these things were happening on ballots and around election time, but I didn't realize there were meetings happening nearly every week that I could go and attend. I want to just also shout out to Anna for making these slides. We presented this at the NACCE annual conference last year. And we also shared some statistics about the teachers that contributed to these bullet points. And Sarah shared an update with me. Out of 48 participants in the focus group, let's see, I hope I get this right. Sarah, correct me if I'm explaining it incorrectly, but let's see. The total participants, the self-identified racial and ethnic identities of the teachers in all four groups were 4 white teachers, 6 African American or Black teachers, 8 Latin teachers, 30 Asian American Pacific Islander teachers, 0 Indigenous teachers. Let that sink in for a minute. 0 Indigenous teachers. So we're getting all this information, but still someone's voice is not being heard. And that's just kind of the fact of, it takes time to build awareness around places where people's voice can be heard. So we're working on that, and it's going to change over time. I just know it. But still, we're still trying to work on that inclusion piece, right? Getting people to the table and to share their perspectives. Let's see, I don't know if that's around 20 of the Asian American Pacific Islander teachers holding the focus group conversation in Cantonese. So this is a big thing for me. I actually almost forgot to say this. I really, really, really love and am thrilled that we can offer tonight's presentation in multiple language. I've done this presentation a handful of times, and this is the first time an organization that has had me speak about this has actually offered it in real time in other languages. Best part of this whole thing for me. So we do these focus groups to promote teacher leadership, and they're facilitated by and for teachers. We have a couple people here that have facilitated the administrators group, and I believe the Black and African American group begins soon. Correct me if I'm wrong. That's starting in, I think, Lashanti, thank you, or you're one of the facilitators, shout out to you. And pedagogical leaders as well. All right, so let's take a few moments again to consider where we're starting from. Feel free to add to the chat as I'm going through these next slides and these next questions. We're not going to do more breakouts because, like I said, we've only got about 20 minutes left, so I'm going to move us along. Ask yourself the questions I asked myself, but add your own questions too. These are just to get us started. I see some responses coming through the chat. All right. Oh, and thank you, Brooke, for sharing. I actually am planning to share that after. That's one of my resources that I'm planning to share after tonight. So thank you. All right. Now we're going to do a temperature check. Type in the chat where you are right now in your career, at your site, however this lands for you. Where are you? Are you thriving? Are you just surviving? You're kind of there, but not feeling totally one with the feeling of belonging. Are you struggling? Is there just a lot that needs to work on at your site or in your personal career development? Or are you in crisis? Like, let us know if you feel comfortable. You can not feel comfortable, private chat as well. This is one of my favorite things to look at just in general on any given day. You can apply it to so many things in life, just a really great way to assess the stress, as I think Jody once said. All right, I shared a quote with you at the very beginning. I'm going to share one more. Start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. So where can each of us realistically go from here? We've already reflected on some of the dynamics that set us up for more belonging as individuals, but let's think about it in more detail. And as we go through the next series of questions, again, I encourage you to write down your thoughts, take a screenshot of this and come back to it later, or wait for us to send you the slides. Talk about it with a colleague, talk about it with your partner or a friend. Talk about it with your director, your supervisor, your admin, your parent volunteer community if you're in a home childcare environment and you have that kind of relationship. But first, we're going to talk about my personal formula for thinking and working towards more belonging. So again, I might have to go through these a little bit quicker than we intended because we wanted to make sure you had time for breakouts, but rest assured, you will get the slides, and you can always email me if anything was confusing or not clear. So the way I kind of broke it down into chunks for myself was to consider choices, actions, lenses, and mirrors. This is what I call my calm approach. Choices can be things we believe within the narratives, those single stories that we either believe about ourselves or about others, just patterns of thinking. And the reason I believe it's important to think about our internal choices, like what we are influenced by, is because if we don't question that energy, the influence that we are either bringing or, being influenced by, we can't craft a more intentional approach. So we got to name it to tame it, or whatever that that quote is. And this is going to be up to every single one of us, and it's going to look differently. The qualities of one person or organization or team is going to be different from the next. So there's not a one size fits all, as I'm sure you can imagine. It would be impossible to all reach belonging in the same exact way, which is why I tested you with that question, how do we get there? Because there is no one way. The external choices that I ask you to consider is, it reminds me of another quote from Dr. Montrese McNeil Ransom: don't stay where you're tolerated, go where you are appreciated. If your voice lands flatly or falls on deaf ears with one person, go right to the next, or take some time, reflect on it. Who am I surrounding myself with, and why aren't they listening? Is it how I'm approaching the conversation, or is it just that I'm surrounded by people that don't believe that my voice matters? Because once you believe it, you're going to notice who doesn't, and you're going to notice that you're not going to really be able to work toward belonging in certain circles. And so eliminating or limiting your social media, not eliminating it completely, but being more choosy about it, using that power of choice to really surround yourself and absorb the best and most geared toward belonging energy. So just consider the types of things you're consuming. I know for me, I had to cut out a lot of the immediate news sources that I was getting every day. For me personally, it was really, it was a daily devastation, as I'm sure you can imagine if you've been following any kind of news in the world and over recent times. But we're constantly participating in that, right? And so decide for yourself what percentage of your energy you're going to invest in some of those things. Yes, it's good to know about current events, but how can we possibly have energy for it all? It's kind of a thing that we all kind of struggle with, I want to say, but sense of belonging, sense of purpose needs to be really carefully crafted. Okay, and it takes time. It's not going to be something you're just going to come to after you delete certain social media or stop watching the news. It's just one thing that we can do. The next thing is action. I really believe strongly in making time for being. And the one thing I want to point out about this slide that's really important is to notice and pause the productivity loop. So you're all here to learn, right? That's productive in a way, but you're being really intentional with what you're learning. This is something that's going to inform the way you think about yourself, the way you think about others for years to come, hopefully the rest of your life. But you had to stop doing one thing in order to be here. And so when you stop doing this, what are you going to do next? Are you going to take time to just kind of let it all sink in, or do you need to go to the next thing? Both are true. A lot of the times we have to do certain things on our list, but try to find at least a little slice to just be, to not be anyone else but yourself, to really just take in how you're feeling or what you're going through. And that takes looking at what you spend the bulk of your time doing. Also, I believe that taking time for moving, making changes, aligning more with what we want is one way we can reach belonging. Are we isolated? I think Anna says it best when she's like, we operate in silos. We're on our podcast, we talk a lot about how in ECE, there's this department over here, and they're kind of talking to this department over here, but the two really aren't on the same page. So how are you doing that in your everyday life? Are you communicating in ways that connect or isolate? And if so, how can you become more connected to either other teachers, other people that value the same things you value, other communities that might share commonalities? How are we connecting with policymakers? I know I wasn't before I joined ECESF and started coming to, campaign meetings. I wasn't even aware that they could even want to hear from people like me. But now that I know, you better believe I'm working toward letting them hear what I am thinking and going through in daily life. So just check in with yourself, kind of check things out, see where your movement or alignment is needed. Lenses. This is one of my favorite ones. I'm going to introduce the author back. Sorry, I'm going to pronounce her name when I see the slide because I have to look at it to say it. And she's going to talk about this more, but preventing those single story narratives, preventing stereotypes, getting that compassion muscle working, noticing, I'm always looking at it from my perspective. What if I took this other perspective? What if I just kind of stepped outside of all that I know, all that I am, and turned the tables a little bit? And do I come to more understanding? Do I still disagree, but am more rooted in why I disagree? So just appreciating the scope of all there is out there. And this one's going to be a very short part of the video. Gotta get it at just the right spot. Okay.
All of these stories make me who I am. But to insist on only these negative stories is to flatten my experience and to overlook the many other stories that formed me. The single story creates stereotypes. And the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story.
Okay, like I said, very quick share on that one because, as I'm sure you can imagine, we've already kind of covered why single stories are dangerous, but policymakers are currently only getting part of the story. So there's still a whole, encyclopedia of our stories that they don't have, and which is what makes the focus groups even that much more important. All right, so in addition to thinking about other perspectives, lenses also includes making time for giving up that control of always knowing. I know as educators, sometimes there's this preconceived notion that we've got to have the answers. But one of my favorite things to do in the classroom is to, when a child asks me a question, to ask them a question back. What are you doing? Guess what I'm doing? What do you think I'm doing? What do you notice I'm doing? Right? So just an example of how giving up that control can feel sometimes. It's easier just to give the answer. But once we stop, pause the narrative, and reduce our need to know, and just allow ourselves to be surprised and taught something, we can really start to change those synapses in the brain that stick with what's comfortable, stick with what's, we're already aware of. Really, really, again, building more muscles of awareness and letting ourselves really hear that, really feel that, and notice it. And finally, mirrors. Making time for reflection can really bring us closer to belonging. That's what we've been doing all night, so I really don't need to go too much into this one. But looking again at our daily habits, what are the things that I do on a daily basis? What are the things that we all do on a daily basis that really return us to this conversation, return us to the awareness that I get to choose what belonging means for me? And sometimes that means returning to a place where we feel the most centered, we feel most like ourselves. Naming those things and making a commitment to returning to those things can be something that we do for ourselves to ensure at least some sense of belonging. I mean, I've been in situations, I've lived with roommates and stuff where I didn't even feel like I belonged at home, right? There's just some, growing up, didn't feel like I really belonged there, as I explained earlier. But this is something that I encourage you to ask yourself over and over again, and to really see where you can make more space for returning to yourself in that way. And then mirrors also includes replenishing and restoring our sense of belonging. Like I said, this is ongoing work. It's never finished. And that also can do wonders for your mental health and your general well-being. And again, thinking of this broader as a workforce, what are we doing to replenish teachers' stamina? What are we doing to restore our belief that things can get better? I will share this with you after tonight, but I'm just going to go through quickly and just read the bigger print. This came from NACI, and its original title was Creating a Caring, Equitable Community of Engaged Learners, I believe, but I changed it to community members because everything we do in the hopes that children will thrive, we can do for ourselves. So upholding the unique value and dignity of each person, recognizing each person's unique strengths, developing trusting relationships with each person. And these are, when I say each person in whatever your learning community or your ECE community may look like. Considering the learning environment, actively promoting each person's agency, recognizing and being prepared to provide different levels of support depending on what each person needs. Again, like tonight, the translation, a wonderful way to recognize and be prepared to provide that. Considering how our biases, implicit and explicit, may be contributing to those interactions and the messages we're putting out in the world. Using multi-tiered systems of support. So again, I ask you what your next stepping stone will be. How will you solidify the choices that you're prepared to offer to yourself, to others, or to ask for in your work environment? Which of those actions that you've narrowed down, that you're taking time to really do day in and day out, show that you belong or show that you believe others belong? Whose lenses are you giving consideration? And how often are you committed to looking in the mirror, either as an organization, as an individual, or etc.? All right, last time we're going to hear from this wonderful TED Talk of Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. I'm going to keep practicing that until I get it right.
I wrote this about her southern relatives who had moved to the north, and she introduced them to a book about the southern life that they had left behind. They sat around reading the book themselves.
Oh, sorry, I started it too late. Let me go back.
I teach writing workshops in Lagos every summer, and it is amazing to me how many people apply, how many people are eager to write, to tell stories. My Nigerian publisher and I have just started a nonprofit called Farafina Trust, and we have big dreams of building libraries and refurbishing libraries that already exist and providing books for state schools that don't have anything in their libraries, and also of organizing lots and lots of workshops on reading and writing for all the people who are eager to tell our many stories. Stories matter. Many stories matter. Stories have been used to dispossess and to malign, but stories can also be used to empower and to humanize. Stories can break the dignity of a people, but stories can also repair that broken dignity. The American writer Alice Walker wrote this about her southern relatives who had moved to the north, and she introduced them to a book about the southern life that they had left behind. They sat around reading the book themselves, listening to me read the book, and a kind of paradise was regained. I would like to end with this thought, that when we reject the single story, when we realize that there is never a single story about any place, we regain a kind of paradise. Thank you.
So hopefully we can get to our own paradise eventually. But until then, we're going to have to take those mighty small steps. So thank you, Anna, for creating a list of things we can do in the meantime. Please screenshot this or wait until we send you the slides, but you'll get links to all of these things as well. So we're going to ask all of you to choose at least one. I'm going to ask you to choose at least one thing you will do in the name of belonging after tonight. You can connect with us at ECESF, fill out our interest form, or send the interest form to a colleague you think might be interested. Please, please, please help us advocate for livable teacher wages. Some of us are on the teacher campaign and we're meeting often to think about these things and to hold policymakers accountable for what they've promised us. And share your experience. The reason I shared that last clip is to just show the importance and the possibility of sharing our stories, whether it's with one other person at your site or with someone that doesn't even work in ECE. Just practice telling your story and what it means to you and why it, how it's brought you here. Just again, planting those seeds and questioning and revisiting our stories so that we really feel, strongly about them being our truth. Let's see. I don't know if Anna dropped the links to these things in the chat yet. We're gonna do that as well. Oh, yes. Thank you. All right. I just want to say thank you so much for your time. I'm amazed we did this before 8:15. I just really appreciate your attention, your thoughtful participation, and I just, again, appreciate you taking the time on a weeknight after a full day work to have this conversation, to begin or continue your belonging journey. Feel free to reach out to me anytime, connect with me on LinkedIn. I'll drop my website into the chat. And please, please, please share your feedback on this event. We really appreciate your voice. You can share it with us first if it's the first time you're sharing how you feel about conversations like these. We want to know so that we can make our future events meaningful to you. And again, thank you.